Hello and welcome. This is a really exciting morning. Thank you all for coming, braving this torrential downpour that we heard a second ago. I'm Dr. Tyler Drake. I'm the director of the Bioscience Incubator here at Austin Community College. We are a fully equipped wet lab incubator facility. We work with startup companies in the life sciences. We currently have 17 member companies that are commercializing technologies all across the life sciences. And on top of that, we run a student internship program where we hire ACC local high school students as employees at the incubator, work with our member companies. Just a couple quick thank yous. I want to thank BioAustin for co-sponsoring the event with us. Also want to thank Dr. Richard Rhodes, who's in the audience, ACC President and CEO, and Trustee Nora De Hoyos Comstock, who's also here. Thank you very much for coming. Just a quick rundown of the show today. We're going to start off learning about the International Space Station opportunities for innovation. And then we're fortunate to have astronaut Stephanie Wilson come up and talk to us more about research in life in space. Thank you guys so much. So I'm not going to take up any more time. Let's get the show started. Up first, we have Etop Essen with the International Space Station National Lab, followed by Pete Hasbrook, Program Science Officer and Manager at Johnson Space Center in Houston. Thanks, guys.
Well, good morning, everybody. Great crowd this morning. You all look good. Thanks for coming to our Destination Station event. This is an awareness campaign that's put on by NASA and the International Space Station, and we're here to talk to you, as was said a few minutes ago, about the work that we're doing on the ISS, the research and commercialization activities that are going on. So we have a presentation. I'm going to do the first part. Pete is going to come up and do a portion in between, and then I'll come back and close it out before Stephanie comes up and talks about her experiences on the ISS. So let's get going with the presentation, an opportunity for innovation. And what we want to talk to you are the innovation opportunities and ideas that come about because we're moving our work environment from doing work down here on Earth to space. And this is a new concept for some people. So as we go through the presentation, we hope that you will begin to think about how you can join and collaborate with us in working on the ISS. So agenda-wise, I will go through a brief history of the ISS National Lab and the ISS, and then, as I mentioned before, Pete's going to come up and talk to us and answer the question, why space? Why do we care? What is it that's so compelling about doing work under the conditions that we have up on the space station that gives us new insight into biological and chemical and physical phenomena in a way that we cannot do down here on Earth? And then we'll show you some examples of the facilities that we have on the space station, the laboratory facilities, and take you through a few project examples and show you some of the commercial R&D that is going on the space station. So then in terms of the history, you can see a graphical representation of the ISS on the right-hand side of the slide. And it's overlaid over the image of a football field, so it gives you an idea of the scale of this amazing feat of human engineering. So it's about 357 feet from end to end. It's about 66 feet high, weighs about 1 million pounds, and it's continuously circling the Earth at a speed of 175,000 miles an hour. So if you're a stargazer, you can actually stand on the Earth and see the ISS with the naked eye. So in 1998, we had the launch of the first module of the ISS. It was actually built over a 10-year period, and it took more than 30 missions to get the whole thing constructed. But in 1998, the first module went up. There was a Russian model by the name of Zarya. The first US module went up in about 2001. And the construction of the ISS really represented a collaboration between 5 different space agencies and about 15 different countries. So in 2000, we had the first 3 astronauts that went up to the space station, 1 US astronaut and 2 Russians. And so if you just count from these time periods, back in November of 2018, we celebrated 20 years of the ISS being in orbit. And looking forward to November of this year, we will have almost 20 years, actually 20 years, of continuous human habitation on Earth. So I see some children sitting up here. My children and some of these kids here and some of your children will be able to say pretty soon that there's never been a time that they can remember when we didn't have human beings living both down here on Earth and also off the planet, right? It's an amazing accomplishment when you think about it. So then in 2005, the US Congress designated the US portion of the space station to be a national lab. Much like we have national laboratories down here on the ground that some of you may be familiar with and also work with from time to time. So we have a national lab up there. And furthermore, in 2011, NASA was directed to select a manager for this national lab facility. So we are the ISS National Lab. We manage this facility in orbit. We have about 50 employees in the ISS National Lab. We're based in Melbourne, Florida, near the Kennedy Space Center. We also have a satellite office in Houston, Texas, near the Johnson Space Center, and other employees around the East and the West Coast. So in terms of the mission of the National Lab, we're all about making sure that we maintain the US leadership position as a major spacefaring nation, right? And you can read what's up there on this slide. I'm not going to go through all of the bullet points. The main message is that we want to partner with commercial companies in order to accelerate the pace and the quality of innovation that's possible when we're doing research and technology development on the space station. Again, because we have conditions up on the space station, microgravity, the extreme conditions, and also the vantage point of the ISS that allow us to gain insights in a way that we cannot do down here on Earth. So we want to partner with commercial companies to accelerate the pace of that. It costs a lot of money to put the space station up in orbit. It costs a lot of money to maintain it from year to year. And so we want to make sure that by partnering with commercial companies and working with different agencies and organizations, we get the maximum return on this investment that's been made by the American taxpayer and others to put this amazing piece of human ingenuity into orbit. So we also want to inspire the next generation, right? In order to maintain our leadership position, we have to have the next generation coming up to be interested in being, the next set of astronauts, being the next set of researchers that are doing work in space. And so we have a very big focus on STEM programs as well. So also the reason that we do this in terms of managing the National Lab and pushing forward commercialization activity, we want to seed and grow and expand commercial activity in space. So we're trying to grow the space economy, and there's been a renaissance in the space industry, really with a lot of money and new ideas and new companies coming in and really pushing this aspect of commercialization of space forward. So that's what the National Lab is all about, again, in partnership with NASA. And just to round out the introduction piece here, in terms of managing the National Lab, we work across several different focus areas that you can see on the right-hand side of the slide. So life sciences, a lot of experimentation and work that is very relevant to what's happening in Bio-Austin with the incubation work that you're doing. We have a lot of pharmaceutical companies that we work with, and we'll show you some examples a little bit later. Physical sciences, we do a lot of advanced materials work as well. And you can see the other focus areas. Again, we'll have some examples for you a bit later. So we collaborate with large commercial companies, as I mentioned, a lot of pharmaceutical companies that we work with. Initially, when we began doing this work, we worked with companies that were traditionally in the space industry, so the likes of Boeing and Lockheed. But also now we've really branched out and we are engaging with companies that have traditionally not been in the space industry. So companies like Target Corporation, companies like IBM, companies like Goodyear, the list goes on and on. So again, they're helping us foster this commercialization activity in space. Also, I just want to touch on, you see there entrepreneurs, startup accelerators like Bio-Austin, and many others that we could name in terms of, again, helping them get started in developing research, doing research, and building up their commercialization activity in space. We also have implementation partners and commercial service providers that help us translate the experimentation that goes on the ground into space-based flight projects. A lot of the companies that we work with that aren't familiar with working in space don't really know how to do that. So we provide that expertise, or we help provide that expertise for them. And of course, we work with a lot of government agencies, the DoD, the NSF, the NIH. We have programs with NCATS, the National Center for the Advancement of Translational Sciences, a big partner. And of course, NASA is a big partner for us as well. So with that, I'll have Pete come on up, and he'll take us through why space.
Well, good. Well, thank you very much. On behalf of the NASA half of this team that's here, I want to thank you personally as well. There's already been some really good conversations here among the people who are interested in finding out more about space, whether it's for education purposes or for working with us, business in space. Etop didn't say it, but we also have other people who are here as part of the team. If you don't get a chance to talk to him or me afterwards, we have Mickey, we have Liz, we have Heidi in the back. So several people to talk to if you have questions or just want to talk with us. So again, thank you for being here. So why would you want to do research in space? Why would you want to use the International Space Station? There's really three main areas. There's microgravity, or the lack of gravity, almost zero gravity. The ISS is a really extreme environment outside, and it's also a platform where we can look down at the Earth or down up at space. So first, from the microgravity perspective, we say micro because it's not totally zero gravity. There is a little bit that you have to worry about a millionth of a gravity. How am I doing? Okay. So there's a little bit of gravity that you have to deal with. So we treat that carefully. But in microgravity, if you don't have gravity pushing something down to the surface you're working on, like let's say cells, if you're trying to grow them in a petri dish here on the ground, they grow in 2 dimensions. In space, they'll take more of a 3-dimensional shape because, or like a droplet of fuel, as you see on the screen here. That's what surface tension does. In no gravity, it allows the liquid takes the shape of a sphere because that's surface tension minimized in that case. So in this case, as you see on the screen here, we do research in combustion with droplets. Cell biology takes on a whole different, it shows us different things in space. So in microgravity, you don't have gravity-driven convection. As you know, convection is the motion of a fluid. It makes hot air rise, hot liquid rise. In the case of a flame in the upper left, as that flame rises and the exhaust gases go away, it allows new oxygen and cooler air in to feed the flame. In space, it doesn't do that. The flame will just form a droplet and a ball. In the bottom left, boiling behaves differently. You don't have gravity to take the hotter liquid away from the heated surface. It just sticks there. You eventually get some boiling, but it stays there, so the surface can get really, really hot. If you are growing crystals or cells, here on the ground, you have to worry about impurities and sedimentation. In microgravity, your crystals or your cells can take longer to grow and slower, and it's not pulling those impurities into the cells or into the crystals. This is a little video of what happens when you ignite a droplet of fuel in space. That's what we study. In this case, it was studying the extinguishment of the flame, not necessarily how it burns, but what happens when it extinguishes, when it gets to the point where there's no longer fuel or there's no longer oxygen. And that has implications for us in the automotive industry, for example, more efficient and clean engines. In spacecraft safety, we would hate to have a fire in an enclosed environment, so we want to understand how that fire might burn and might continue. If you are a researcher who's trying to understand crystals or protein structure, if you grow crystals on the ground, they again are subject to gravity. They may flatten out. They may not grow big enough that you can even study the structure. But if you can grow them in microgravity in space, your crystals, for one, can grow bigger because it's in 3 dimensions. And for two, again, you don't have the impurities. So as an example on the screen in the bottom left in the pink and yellow, the very bottom left is a good protein crystal grown on the ground. Just next to the right of it is a crystal of the same protein grown in space. You can see it's bigger. And so now you can bring that back and study it with your electron microscope, let's say, on the ground, and see what the structure is. What is the protein shaped like that's creating that crystal? We work with nanotechnology, with microparticles, and in this case it's in a liquid, so it's a colloid. And in this case, that's a solid suspended in a liquid. In this case, the experimenters were using iron particles in that liquid, and when you put a magnetic field across that liquid, now the particles line up in a different orientation and formation. It changes the viscosity and the thickness of that liquid. And in this case, the physical sciences has applications in shock absorbers, you want a smooth ride when you're on a smooth road, but if you're hitting bumps, you want to stiffen up the shocks. Also has applications in earthquake response in a building. A big audience, I'm sure, here is living systems. When we are in space, astronauts, rodents, model organisms, cells, they experience a different environment. It's a more stressful environment. And for example, all of us here are subject to gravity, our bodies, so there's a normal distribution of fluid in our bodies. When you go to space to microgravity, that fluid shifts to a different distribution in your body, so your chest and your head get a lot more fluid in them, you get less in your legs. Over time, your body takes care of that, and that's your long-term distribution. But when you come back to the ground, gravity is going to pull that fluid potentially from your head. So people can feel lightheaded when they get back to the ground. Another area is, let's say, bones. In space, if you didn't exercise at all, your bones would lose mass, lose structure, lose the calcium structure of the bones. And over time, if you didn't do anything, your bones would become weaker, like you lose about 1% of your bone mass for every month you'd be in orbit. So imagine being in space, going to Mars, 6 or 9 months to get there, you've lost 10% of your bone mass. We'd really hate for the first activity an astronaut does to trip over something and break an arm or break a leg. The good news is that we can compensate for that. We've learned that exercise and a good diet, just like Mom told us, will help you retain and recreate bone strength. That also has applications on the ground for pharmaceuticals, for osteoporosis, for those of us who, as we get older, lose bone. Another part of the space station advantage is the extreme environment up there. If you're outside in space, in the vacuum of space, you have, for one, vacuum. That may help some researchers. You have a higher radiation environment, which may help you test some materials, for example. We also can send equipment to space and see how it works on the space station before you rely on it on a future spacecraft. We've got extreme temperature conditions. From the dark side of the Earth in the shadow of the station, it can be minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Come around to the daylight side, which we do every 90 minutes, you can be up to 250 degrees if you're in the sunlight. So there's a real advantage there of testing materials, for example, of paints, electrical coatings, solar arrays, again, with an eye toward whether it's future spacecraft, or even some cases that helps companies on the ground with their research. I just talked a little bit about materials testing, what we can expose. Technology demonstration. This is a robot, but there are technologies here in the room for biotechnology, for example. We take things to orbit that are not fully, let's say, certified and developed. We want to see how they operate in microgravity. Will the systems work as we thought? You also can take a system to microgravity with a crew on board. Let's say it's a contingency system. A life support system has to have a lot of different backups, and you don't always want to use that in a normal course of a day. But with the space station, you can run through all the different modes, the contingency modes. You can run it until it fails, or when it breaks, you can try it again. At worst, almost worst, you've got a crew there to intervene if you need them to fix something. And I would say at worst, you could bring it home and test it out afterwards. So not just robotics like you see here, but biotechnology, communication systems, life support, as I mentioned, lots of opportunities for testing your technology in space. Another area I'm sure is of interest here is cell biology. Again, what happens to our cells in space? It's not just growing in 3 dimensions, but things react to the stressful space environment differently. Microgravity stresses the systems, there's radiation, oxidative stress, and so cells behave differently. And so if you're studying, you may see a different phenomenon in microgravity. When you take gravity away, the smaller forces start to come out and dominate, and it's easier to study those. What's happening at the wall of your Petri dish, or the wall of your tube as a fluid is flowing? or the wall as you're trying to combine two metals into an alloy, what's happening in the crystallization there. Also in the cell, in the human body, things age more quickly. Our immune system reacts differently. You can use the modeling of the aging process to say what's going to happen to a human. You can correlate that through model organisms to really what's happening to us. Another area that has gotten a lot of traction is the pharmaceutical area of monoclonal antibodies. And these are part of our immune system, and understanding how a body reacts to a disease or to a cancer or something like that helps researchers on the ground. Again, if you study it in microgravity, in model organisms, modeling what happens in the human, you can learn in space and not have to, you learn more than you would if you try to run those in two dimensions on the ground. In-space manufacturing has a lot of opportunities for us. 3D printers are everywhere, right? We're going to need them in space. Why would you bring repair parts for everything on your spacecraft? It's like bringing a whole second spacecraft with you. There's opportunities to print what you need, and even a newer technology is refabrication. Take what you've printed, that 3D printed plastic or whatever material, repurpose it, take it back to the raw material. So we've got technology demonstrations that are testing that now as well. Aha, a video. So 3D printing, you use gravity, right, to set up what you're printing. A little anecdote here, the first 3D printer that we sent to space, when it did its first product, it was a spare part for itself, kind of showing the value of 3D printing. And finally, the vantage point of space. We go around the Earth, as Etop said, 90 minutes per orbit, 16 times a day. We're 250 miles up. So we see the Earth from 52 degrees up to 52 degrees south. We see 85% of the Earth's landmass, 95% of the population. But also importantly, we see the same spot on the Earth both in daytime and darkness. So you can see it in the morning, see how the temperatures and the winds are behaving somewhere, come back a couple orbits later and see it later in the day. We call that the diurnal effect. So Space Station is a big satellite. It's already got the power, the structure, the data, the cooling. For you, if you've got an instrument that you want to test in space, just bring it to Space Station. You don't have to build that whole new instrument, the whole satellite. One last thing I think is Space Station is a partnership of 5 space agencies in 15 countries. And that partnership is a very high level. It's effectively an intergovernmental agreement. One of the other benefits to the research in space is we are part of the United Nations International Disaster Charter, meaning if there's a disaster somewhere in the world, that country can ask the UN, which asks the disaster response participants to take any assets, any imagery that they can take from space, send it down, send it to the people who are trying to understand the magnitude of what happened on the ground, be it flooding, fires, earthquake, whatever. At this point, I'll turn it back over to Etop. He'll talk to you more about the facilities and the laboratory that we have in space.
Thank you, Pete. Okay, so the intent of this section is really to illustrate to you that we do have a laboratory, a full-fledged laboratory up in space, very much like you would have a laboratory down here. So we're just going to give you an overview of the facilities that are on the inside of the space station. We do have a lot of facilities external to the space station as well, as Pete alluded to, for testing in the remote extreme environment of space. But we won't go through those facilities today. So as far as on the inside, we've got freezers for cryogenic storage, preservation of samples, used quite a bit for our life sciences studies. We do a lot of work with rodents. It's very important because rodents are human analogs. So, as Pete alluded to, studying these helps us understand the impacts of spaceflight on the human body. So we have a full-fledged rodent research facility. We can study the rodents as they behave under the influence of microgravity. We can test anesthetic methods. We can do DXA studies. That's an X-ray technique for looking at body composition. So things like percentage of body fat, lean tissue, and most importantly also studying bone density. We can do that with the DXA technique. Grip strength. We can dissect the rodents. And of course also we hope that we can get them all back down to Earth after the mission alive for further studies on the ground. We can perform cell cultures, again, to understand how cells, viruses, bacteria, etc., grow in space. We can study the transport across cell membranes. We have glove boxes for doing experiments in very contained environments. So if our astronauts are working with hazardous substances or experiments that may generate particulates, we want all of that contained just as we would down here in a lab on the ground. So we've got microgravity glove boxes that we can use for that purpose. We have centrifuges for separation and study of biological samples, again, very much used in our life sciences experiments. We have microscopes, again, just as you would down here. We can do DNA sequencing. Dr. Kate Rubins performed the first DNA sequencing test on board the space station in 2016. So we can do full-fledged experiments that involve sequencing. We have a material science laboratory, so we can study all kinds of materials, ceramics, composites, glasses, etc. We can characterize these. Again, especially if they're being studied in the extreme environment, we can bring them back in and do tests on these materials and understand how they behave in space. We can do a lot of fluid flow type experiments using the fluids integration rack. Again, here we're studying things like combustion, how do fluids behave under the influence of microgravity, sedimentation, capillarity, wetting, things like that. So again, that's just to give you a flavor of the fact that we've got all of these facilities available for experimentation. We've performed over 2,300 experiments in all of the areas, focus areas, since the inception of the ISS National Lab. So lastly then in this section, just to show you some examples of flight projects and some of the companies that are working with us and the kinds of work that they're doing. This is a study by Millikan, and they're studying how materials, textiles, cotton fabrics burn in space. They burn differently in space than they do here on Earth under the influence of microgravity. So different kinds of textiles are set ablaze, again, in a contained environment on the ISS, and they obtain information on how fast the flames burn, how long it takes to extinguish the flames in these different materials. All of this kind of information is used to develop models, and it's used to design better fabrics for flame retardation, both in space and on Earth. This is a study by Goodyear. They're studying the aggregation of silica particles which are used in the manufacture of tires. So again, this can provide insights to help them better design tires for use both down here on Earth for the automobile industry, and also as we look to landing autonomous vehicles on places like the Moon and on Mars, this can help them better develop tires for that purpose. Okay, this is a study of colloids by Procter & Gamble. So we're trying to understand, how mixtures of colloids behave when they're settling under the influence of microgravity. So in the absence of gravity, things behave and mix differently. So this has implications for everyday household products like shampoos and soaps, and even things like medicine. So what they're trying to do here is improve the shelf life. So as they understand the influence of stabilizers and some of the additives that are used in these products, maybe the use of some of these different components can be reduced as they understand how they mix and how they behave and how the mixtures age under the influence of microgravity. So again, it's an attempt to make better products that will benefit us down here on Earth. So this is another example by Eli Lilly. Again, Eli Lilly is doing a lot of work on the space station, ranging from studying rodents, again, as human analogs, studying muscle wasting, all the way to crystal growth studies, which help them understand how to prepare better drugs for delivery, into the human body. So here, This is a study on hard-to-wet solids. So you can imagine when you swallow tablets, what they're trying to do here is understand how those tablets dissolve in space, understand better how that behaves under microgravity. So that would help them design better methods of delivering those drugs, into the human body, how those dissolve when we actually swallow them and take them in, and they dissolve in the human body. Okay, so again, that's just a flavor of some of the companies that work with us on the space station. All of this and more information is available on our website, issnationallab.org. We also have a conference that we put on annually. This year it's in Atlanta at the end of July, and it's a great place to come to and to interact both with folks from the ISS National Lab and all of our partners. I mentioned the implementation partners earlier. They're present. A lot of the commercial companies that we work with, a lot of the pharmaceutical companies that we work with, they would attend this conference. And so it's just a great environment to find out about all of the research that goes on the National Lab. So we hope that you'll have a chance to come and join us at the conference this year. We also have a magazine called Upward that we publish quarterly, which is a highlight of all of the research that, again, we're doing on the National Lab. So it's a very good source of information as well. So I think with that, that concludes our portion of the presentation. And okay, so we'll invite Stephanie Wilson back up to talk to us about her experiences.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Let's thank our speakers one more time. And it's definitely my honor to introduce NASA astronaut Stephanie Wilson. She's a veteran of 3 space flights. She spent more than 42 days in space and is an alum of UT at Austin, which I think is cool. Yeah. Selected to be an astronaut by NASA in 1996, Stephanie flew her first space shuttle mission in 2006, and then the other 2 missions were in 2007, 2010. Wilson has served as Space Station Integration Branch Chief from 2010 to 2012. She also served as a member of the 2009, 13, and 17 astronaut selection boards. I actually applied in 2013, so you might have seen my name go across there quickly. As a member of the astronaut office, she is currently the Mission Support Crew Branch Chief. So once again, it's my honor to introduce Stephanie Wilson to ACC.
Ignore the man behind the camera, as they say. Well, it's certainly my pleasure to be here. We're excited to be here to share with you about the research on the space station. It's always nice to be tall, but there are also some of us who are a little bit height challenged. And I have been at NASA now for, it's going on 23 years, so it's been quite a while. But what I'd like to share with you today is a little bit about my career at NASA, the training that we undergo for space flight, and a little bit of the preparation for the missions. I'm just trying to find a good place for it. And also talk about the research on the International Space Station. For astronaut candidacy training, in general, we undergo training for a couple of years when we arrive at the Johnson Space Center. So I'm a member of the class of 1996. I joined 43 other members of the class. We had 35 US and 9 internationals from Canada, Japan, and Europe that joined this class. So we underwent our 2 years of training, and for those of us that are not military, we undergo some survival training, much like the military members do, learning to work with the survival equipment that we have for our aircraft training. So we learn how to put up some makeshift tents, work with all of the survival equipment that we have in the case that we would need it if our aircraft go down. We'd be able to survive until search and rescue could find us. So we have that training. We get a little bit in touch with our Girl Scout and Boy Scout times when we were kids, learning how also to work with those equipments, starting fires and working with the fishing hooks in case there's a river close by, we can do some fishing and things like that. There's also fishing line. We have an opportunity to work with the parachutes. We're not actually able to jump out of the aircraft, but they take us parasailing so that we can get the feel for how to maneuver the parafoil. And we do this at Pensacola Air Force Base in Florida, just off the coast. And that's also where the land survival training is. There's rafts and other survival equipment attached to the kit. And so we learn how to raft should inflate on water entry, but if it does not, there's a way to manually inflate it, bail out the water, and also to signal the aircraft overhead that are looking for you. And also for the ejection seat that's in the NASA T-38s, this is the aircraft that we fly at Ellington Field. We're not able to eject out of those unless we really need it, but there is ejection seat training so that we can feel the force of the acceleration going up the rails. And this happens in Oklahoma at Enid Air Force Base. And again, since we're not able to actually jump out of the aircraft, but they do teach us in the procedures coming through trees and power lines and so forth. So you're suspended from a platform and practicing all of those procedures. And once we complete that training, we're eligible to fly in this two-seat jet trainer that NASA has for us at Ellington Field. It has about an hour and a half of fuel per leg, so we're able to fly across the country to perform together as a crew. Since we're not flying in space all the time, very often together, this is a way that we have an opportunity to work on our crew resource management, working together as a small team at executing procedures, and this transcends all of the training that we do. So it's a very good analog for us. We also have opportunity to do other types of training. This is a retired professor from the University of Texas, Professor Muehlberger, but he used to give us the geology training. We used to take a 2-week trip to Arizona and New Mexico to learn about soil collection, land formation, and to have that training for our future exploration missions in the event that we return to the moon and go on to Mars, which are programs that we're working on now. But we have this training, much like the Apollo astronauts did, to identify these geologic formations. And once we complete the initial general training, we have some very mission-specific training in the areas of robotics and spacewalking. We have different robotic facilities so that we can become familiar with flying the robotic arm. These facilities are resident at the Johnson Space Center. Working in virtual reality, we're able to display in an overhead dome the environment of the International Space Station or the Space Shuttle when we were flying that vehicle. And we have virtual reality displays also to practice our spacewalking. So what's displayed to us in the helmet is the environment of the International Space Station, and we use our hands to grab onto the handrails into the structure for the International Space Station. So it's a way for us to practice the spacewalks and to work again together with the procedures before actually executing that during the flight. And we have a large pool facility as well, since the buoyancy of the water helps us to simulate microgravity. This pool is 100 feet long, 200 feet wide, and 40 feet deep. And so we're able to practice on the structure back then for the Space Shuttle, now for the International Space Station, and for the Orion crew module to execute those procedures in the pool, working with the team that would be working with us in mission control as we execute these procedures underwater. And we have some additional team building or leadership training run for us by an outdoor leadership training school. It's often hiking for 2 weeks in Utah or in the Canyonlands, and or a kayaking trip in Alaska. So every crew goes through this training. Again, we have limited supplies. We're working together as a crew. Everyone has a chance to cycle through being the leader for the day, doing the navigation, and it gets us familiar with working, in some cases, in an extreme environment, either very steep or very cold, and working together with only the equipment that we have during that period to execute and to move our team safely from point A to point B. And then once we complete all of this general training, everyone is eligible for a space flight. My flights were to the International Space Station, and in 2006, I flew the first one. All three were on Discovery. The first flight, STS-121, was a return to flight mission, and I'm also remembering that as we retired the shuttle, we have other opportunities to bring our crew members to the space station. We now fly the Russian Soyuz to this International Space Station. It flies a crew of 3 in a capsule. So we have 6 members living aboard the International Space Station at a given time. Unless we're exchanging the crew, then it'll go down to 3 until a new crew of 3 arrives. And we're looking forward to the commercial crew program, which will give the United States the opportunity to bring crew members to the International Space Station, replacing the Space Shuttle program, which has retired. We have the companies of Boeing and SpaceX that are building capsules for us. These capsules hold crew of 4, and we're hoping that they will be ready soon to bring our crew members to the International Space Station. And that will allow us to have a crew of 7, growing from 6 to 7, living and working on board the International Space Station. And now I'll go back to the flight. So STS-121, this is the crew. We were the second return to flight mission following the Columbia accident. And we brought a logistics module. So while we were not able to fly the shuttle, we went down to a crew of 2 because we could not provide the necessary supplies for a larger crew. When the shuttle returned, we had a logistics module. We brought also Thomas Reiter, a European astronaut, to the International Space Station, going back to a crew of 3. We had several robotics procedures that we had to work in conjunction with the space flight, the spacewalkers, and we were testing a technique using the shuttle robotic arm connected to a boom sensor system to show that it would be a stable platform for repair of either the space shuttle or the International Space Station. On my second flight, 2006, this is the crew, and we delivered a very important component to the International Space Station, Node 2. It's a connecting module, and it allows currently our international partner agencies of Japan and Europe to connect their laboratory modules to the International Space Station. So we initially started with a US laboratory module. Now we have 2 additional for a total of 3, where we're able to conduct the research that you've heard about on the International Space Station. And this connecting module was an important connection point on the space station to add those additional laboratory modules. We also relocated a solar array so that we could have the electrical power to outfit the payloads and experiments that would be in those new laboratory modules. And so in working with that relocation, we encountered a problem. In order to relocate a solar array, you have to close it up, bring it to its new location, and then expand it. And when we were working to expand it, one of the guide wires tore, making a hole in the solar array. So we worked together with our mission control team, using only the supplies that we had on board to do this repair. And we were able to take cufflinks and bridge them over the hole so that we could add some structural stiffness and rigidity so that we could continue extending the solar array. And to this day, it works and provides all of the power as advertised to those international partner laboratories. My third flight was STS-131 in 2010. And we also had a logistics module. This is a view inside the logistics module. It's the way that we're able to resupply the experiments on the International Space Station, either in a rack or smaller payload containers or packages or cargo bags, as we call them. We now have visiting vehicles that bring our experiments to the space station, either Cygnus or SpaceX Dragon. And it gets sometimes very busy inside as we're working to relocate and move the experiments onto the International Space Station and then bring home the experiments that are complete. But we work very carefully with the flight control team. Some of the experiments have to be choreographed and timed. And in some cases, we are transferring samples from the freezers that you saw in some of the earlier presentations. But at this time, there were 2 minus 80-degree laboratory freezers, one in the US lab and one in the Japanese experiment module. And so that the samples can maintain their temperature and remain pristine, we have to very quickly transfer them from the freezer into a double cold bag. So I'm very carefully tending the double cold bag so as to not lose any samples that are in there, and waiting for TJ, who's in the back, to pass me the next sample. So we did all of that and brought those samples home on the mid deck of Discovery. For this flight, we also resurfaced the cooling system on the external part of the space station, bringing up a full ammonia tank and bringing home an empty ammonia tank. And we do all of that work so that we can have a wonderful research platform for the International Space Station, and being able to conduct research in several areas. And here you see Serena. She's a member of Expedition 5657. She flew from June to December of 2018. And it's very fitting for this picture because her background is that she's a medical doctor. But for this cancer therapy study, test the effects of vascular agents on normal blood cells. And this testing helps develop safer and more effective drugs. So we're very fortunate to be an extension of the research team as we're conducting these experiments. We do receive a lot of training on these experiments prior to flight, and we have some very general training in biology and also in rodent research. And then once we enter the flight assigned phase of the training, we work very closely with the principal investigators and also work with them during the mission. For this particular experiment for sequencing, this investigation validates RNA sequencing in space and expands the horizon for genetic studies in space. And as we work also with the processes, it's also helpful to know that the experiments that are developed for use in space can also have ground analogs. And so we were very excited that the experiments and the processing from this particular experiment was useful for research on Earth. This next one is one of my favorites because it is a plant habitat, and in addition to being pleasing, it's nice to see something green in space. It's very good for our psychological health. We have a wonderful view of Earth. There's a cupola module that gives us a panoramic view, but we do miss crunchy food. We miss salads. We have the opportunity to have some fresh food that's brought to us on the visiting vehicles, but it's nice to see something new grow. And on occasion, if it's soy or lettuce or something, it's nice to have the opportunity to taste it. But these plant habitat experiments are very important as we look forward to exploration missions and looking for ways that we can either grow food inside of a habitat or try to make a facility that can be external and also grow plants, perhaps using the soil with additional additives on a new surface. Next you will see Drew. He's a member of Expedition 55 and 56, and he flew from March to October of 2018. And working with these glove boxes and working with the rodent research, it's nice to have the opportunity to work inside this closed environment, and working with these mice helps us to understand how gut bacteria behaves in microgravity and allows researchers to identify where better countermeasures are needed to protect our health. So we're very fortunate to have an opportunity again to work with the teams looking at this work that will eventually benefit us. In the area of human research, you see Alex Gerst, also a member of Expedition 55 and 56, flew from June to December of 2018. And this airway monitoring experiment is very important because the vehicle is an enclosed environment. And we have to keep it clean, both for experiments and for ourselves. So it's very important to have this countermeasure so that we can monitor the environment in which we are living. And as we look forward to Moon and Mars missions, dust accumulation, both from the things that we have inside the vehicle and things that we might have external to bring inside the vehicle, it's very important for us to know what the count is and to be able to minimize that count. And in the area of physical science, this particular study focuses on the forces between particles that cluster together, like quartz and clay. And we have the opportunity to look at those interactions both over a short range and a long range. So very important work for physical scientists. And I have two in the area of technology. We have the opportunity to work with the navigation instruments. And this particular navigation instrument, this handheld sextant, is intended for use on our Orion missions. So we have the opportunity to use the International Space Station as a test bed for some experiments that we plan to fly in future flights. And this Spears experiment, we really enjoy watching. Sometimes these satellites will fly in formation, giving us an insight into attitude control and fluid dynamics. And the fuel that is used by the spacecraft can slosh around in an unpredictable manner. And so being able to study these spheres and their behavior helps us to better understand the dynamics of fluid slosh and tether slosh. And as we look forward to the future, NASA has several programs in work as follow-ons to the International Space Station. Our administrator is a champion of the Moon and Mars and has given us the charge to look at opportunities to return to the Moon and go on to Mars. So we look forward to those opportunities to build vehicles, working with Lockheed Martin, who is building the Orion spacecraft, in collaboration with NASA Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville. It's building the Space Launch System, which is the rocket for that Orion spacecraft. And that will be the vehicle that we will use for the Moon and for Mars derivatives. We have the opportunity also, as we're building a gateway platform to orbit the Moon. And it has several components, and it will also be done internationally, as did our International Space Station. We'll work with those same partners to have a propulsion module, to have a habitat module, an airlock, a robotic arm, and a docking port for the Orion vehicle. And these are just some quick points about the components of that gateway platform. The dates change, but currently we're planning to have a lander also that will descend to the surface in 2024. And that's all that I have for you. Thank you so much for spending the time with us and taking a short tour on NASA's programs.
Now we'll have a special presentation by NASA.
Yeah, so we would like to invite Dr. Rhodes and Mr. Collins to come forward.
We can hold.
Sure. Okay, that was a great idea. So for ACC, Dr. Rhodes, we would like to thank you so much for the opportunity for hosting us here and for having us have the opportunity to share with the space station research. So we have this montage for you from the space station program that we would like to present to you. And Mr. Collins, representing Bio Austin, we also would like to thank you for the opportunity to share our experiences on behalf of the NASA team. We have a montage that we'd like to present to you also.